Section 9 of Army Letters from an Officer's Wife, 1871-1888. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sue Anderson. Army Letters from an Officer's Wife, 1871-1888, by Frances Roe. Section 9, Letters from 1878, Part 1. Camp Baker, Montana Territory, February 1878. Home seems very cozy and attractive after the mountains of snow and ice we crossed and recrossed on our little trip to Helena. The bitter cold of those canyons will long be remembered. But it was a delightful change from the monotonous life in this out-of-the-way garrison, even if we did almost freeze on the road, and it was more than pleasant to be with old friends again. The ball at the hall Friday evening was most enjoyable, and it was simply enchanting to dance once more to the perfect music of the dear old orchestra. And the young people in Helena are showing their appreciation of the good music by dancing themselves positively thin this winter. The band leader brought from New Orleans the Creole music that was so popular there, and at the ball we danced La Verite 4 times. The last was at the request of Lieutenant Joyce, with whom I always danced it in the South. It is thoroughly French, bringing in the waltz, polka, schottische, mazurka, and redowa. Some of those Creole girls were the personification of grace in that dance. We knew of the ball before leaving home and went prepared for it, but had not heard one word about the bal masque to be given at the Army Social Club at Mrs. Gordon's Tuesday evening. We did not have one thing with us to assist in the make-up of a fancy dress. Nevertheless, we decided to attend it. Fay said for me not to give him a thought, that he could manage his own costume. How I did envy his confidence in man and things, particularly things, for just then I felt far from equal to managing my own dress. I had been told of some of the costumes that were to be worn by friends, and they were beautiful, and the more I heard of these things, the more determined I became that I would not appear in a domino. So Monday morning I started out for an idea, and this I found almost immediately in a little shop window. It was only a common pasteboard mask, but nevertheless it was a work of art. The face was fat and silly, and droll beyond description, and to look at the thing and not laugh was impossible. It had a heavy bang of fiery red hair. I bought it without delay, and was wondering where I could find something to go with it in that little town, when I met a friend indeed, who offered me some widths of silk that had been dyed a most hideous shade of green. I gladly accepted the offer, particularly as this friend is in deep mourning, and would not be at the ball to recognize me. Well, I made this really awful silk into a very full skirt that just covered my ankles, and near the bottom I put a broad band of orange-colored cambric, the stiff and shiny kind. Then I made a Mother Hubbard apron of white paper cambric, also very stiff and shiny, putting a big full ruche of the cambric around neck, yoke, and bottom of sleeves. For my head I made a large cap of the white cambric, with ruche all around, and fastened it on tight with wide strings that were tied in a large stiff bow under my chin. We drew my evening dress up underneath both skirt and apron, and pinned it securely on my shoulders, and this made me stout and shapeless. Around this immense waist and over the apron was drawn a wide sash of bright pink, glossy cambric that was tied in a huge bow at the back. But by far the best of all, a real crown of glory, was a pigtail of red hair that hung down my back and showed conspicuously on the white apron. This was a loan by Mrs. Joyce, another friend in mourning, and who assisted me in dressing. We wanted the benefit of the long mirror in the little parlor of the hotel, so we carried everything there and locked the door. And then the fun commenced. I am afraid that Mrs. Joyce's fingers must have been badly bruised by the dozens of pins she used, and how she laughed at me! But if I looked half as dreadful as my reflection in the mirror, I must have been a sight to provoke laughter. We had been requested to give names to our characters, and Mrs. Joyce said I must be a country girl, but it still seems to me that an idiot would have been more appropriate. I drove over with Major and Mrs. Carleton. The dressing rooms were crowded at Mrs. Gordon's, so it was an easy matter to slip away, give my long cloak and thick veil to a maid, and return to Mrs. Carleton before she had missed me, and it was most laughable to see the dear lady go in search of me, peering in everyone's face. But she did not find me, although we went down the stairs and in the drawing-room together, and neither did one person in those rooms recognize me during the evening. Lieutenant Joyce said he knew to whom the hair belonged, but beyond that it was all a mystery. That evening will never be forgotten, for as soon as I saw that no one knew me, I became a child once more, and the more the maskers laughed, the more I ran around. When I first appeared in the rooms there was a general giggle, and that was exhilarating, so off I went. After a time Colonel Fitzjames adopted me and tagged around after me every place. I simply could not get rid of the man. I knew him, of course, and I also knew that he was mistaking me for someone else, which made his attentions anything but complimentary. I told him ever so many times that he did not know me, but he always insisted that it was impossible for him to be deceived, that he would always know me, and so on. He was acting in a very silly manner, quite too silly for a man of his years and a colonel of the regiment, and he was keeping me from some very nice dances, too. So I decided to lead him a dance, and commenced a rare flirtation in cozy corners and out-of-the-way places. I must admit, though, that all the pleasure I derived from it was when I heard the smothered giggles of those who saw us. The colonel was in a domino and had not tried to disguise himself. We went in to supper together, and I managed to be almost the last one to unmask, and all the time Colonel Fitzjames, domino removed, was standing in front of me and looking down with a smile of serene expectancy. The colonel of a regiment is a person of prominence, therefore many people in the room were watching us, not one suspecting, however, who I was. So when I did take off the mask there was a shout, "Why, it's Mrs. Ray!" and "Oh, look at Mrs. Ray!" and several friends came up to us. Well, I wish you could have seen the colonel's face, the mingled surprise and almost horror that was expressed upon it. Of course the vain man had placed himself in a ridiculous position, chasing around and flirting with the wife of one of his very own officers, a second lieutenant at that. It came out later that he, and others also, had thought that I was a Helena girl whom the colonel admires very much. It was rather embarrassing, too, to be told that the girl was sitting directly opposite on the other side of the room, where she was watching us with two big black eyes. And then, further down, I saw Fay also looking at us. But then, a man never can see things from a woman's point of view. The heat and weight of the two dresses had been awful, and as soon as I could get away I ran to a dressing-room and removed the cambric. But the pins! There seemed to be thousands of them. Some of the costumes were beautiful and costly also. Mrs. Manson, a lovely little woman of Helena, was a comet. Her short dress of blue silk was studded with gold stars, and to each shoulder was fastened a long, pointed train of yellow gauze sprinkled with diamond dust. An immense gold star with a diamond sunburst in the center was above her forehead, and around her neck was a diamond necklace. Mrs. Palmer, wife of Colonel Palmer, was King of Hearts, the foundation a handsome red silk. Mrs. Spencer advertised the New York Herald. The whole dress, which was flounced to the waist, was made of the headings of that paper. Major Blair was recognized by no one as an American citizen, in plain evening dress. I could not find Faye at all, and he was in a simple red domino, too. I cannot begin to tell you of the many lovely costumes that seemed most wonderful to me, for you must remember that we were far up in the Rocky Mountains, 500 miles from a railroad. I will send you a copy of the Helena paper that gives an account of the ball, in which you will read that Mrs. Ray was inimitable, the best sustained character in the rooms. I have thought this over some, and I consider the compliment doubtful. We remained one day longer in Helena than we had expected for the ball masque. Consequently, we were obliged to start back the very next morning, directly after breakfast, and that was not pleasant, for we were very tired. The weather had been bitter cold, but during the night a chinook had blown up, and the air was warm and balmy as we came across the valley. When we reached the mountains, however, it was freezing again, and there was glassy ice every place, which made driving over the grades more dangerous than usual. In many places the ambulance wheels had to be blocked and the back and front wheels of one side chained together so they could not turn, in addition to the heavy brake, and then the driver would send the 4 sharp-shod mules down at a swinging trot that kept the ambulance straight, and did not give it time to slip around and roll us down to eternity. There is one grade on this road that is notoriously dangerous, and dreaded by every driver around here because of the many accidents that have occurred there. It is cut in the side of a high mountain, and has 3 sharp turns back and forth, and the mountain is so steep it is impossible to see from the upper grade all of the lower that leads down into the cañon called White's Gulch. This one mountain grade is 1.5 miles long, but the really dangerous place is near the middle turn, where a warm spring trickles out of the rocks and in winter forms thick ice over the road, and if this ice cannot be broken up, neither man nor beast can walk over, as it is always thicker on the inner side. I was so stiffened from the overheating and try to fool dancing at Mrs. Gordon's, it was with the greatest difficulty I could walk at all on the slippery hills, and was constantly falling down, much to the amusement of Faye and the driver. But ride down some of them I would not. At Cañon Ferry, where we remained overnight, the ice in the Missouri was cracked, and there were ominous reports, like pistol shots, down in the cañon below. At first Faye thought it would be impossible to come over, but the driver said he could get everything across if he could come at once. Faye walked over with me, and then went back to assist the driver with the mules, that were still on the bank refusing to step upon the ice. But Faye led one leader, and the driver lashed and yelled at all of them, and in this way they crossed, each mule snorting at every step. There were the most dreadful groans and creakings and loud reports during the entire night, and in the morning the river was clear, except for a few pieces of ice that were still floating down from above. The Missouri is narrow at Cañon Ferry, deep and very swift, and it is a dreadful place to cross at any time, on the ice or on the cable ferry boat. They catch a queer fish there called the ling. It has 3 sides, is long and slender, and is perfectly blind. They gave us some for supper, and it was really delicious. We found everything in fine order upon our return, and it was very evident that Cagey had taken good care of the house and Hal, but Billy Grayback had taken care of himself. He was given the run of my room, but I had expected, of course, that he would sleep in his own box, as usual. But no, the little rascal in some way discovered the warmth of the blankets on my bed, and in between these he had undoubtedly spent most of the time during our absence, and there we found him after a long search, and there he wants to stay all the time now, and if anyone happens to go near the bed they are greeted with the fiercest kind of smothered growls. The black horse has been sold, and Faye has bought another, a sorrel that seems to be a very satisfactory animal. He is not as handsome as Ben, nor as fractious either. Bettie is behaving very well, but is still nervous and keeps her forefeet down just long enough to get herself over the ground. She is beautiful, and Kelly simply adores her, and keeps her bright red coat like satin. Faye can seldom ride with me because of his numerous duties, and not one of the ladies rides here, so I have Kelly go, for one never knows what one may come across on the roads around here. They are so seldom traveled and are little more than trails. End of letter. Camp Baker, Montana Territory, March, 1878. The mail goes out in the morning, and in it a letter must be sent to you, but it is hard, hard for me to write, to have to tell you that my dear dog, my beautiful greyhound, is dead. Dead and buried. It seems so cruel that he should have died now, so soon after getting back to his old home, friends, and freedom. On Tuesday, Faye and Lieutenant Lomax went out for a little hunt, letting Hal go with them, which was unusual and to which I objected, for Lieutenant Lomax is a notoriously poor shot and hunter, and I was afraid he might accidentally kill Hal, mistake him for a wild animal. So as they went down our steps I said, "Please do not shoot my dog," much more in earnest than in jest, for I felt that he would really be in danger, as it would be impossible to keep him with them all the time. As they went across the parade ground, rifles over their shoulders, Hal jumped up on Faye and played around him, expressing his delight at being allowed to go on a hunt. He knew what a gun was made for just as well as the oldest hunter. That was the last I saw of my dog. Faye returned long before I had expected him, and one quick glance at his troubled face told me that something terrible had happened. I saw that he was unhurt and apparently well, but where was Hal? With an awful pain in my heart I asked, "Did Lieutenant Lomax shoot Hal?" After a second's hesitation, Faye said, "No, but Hal is dead." It seemed too dreadful to be true, and at first I could not believe it, for it had been only such a short time since I had seen him bounding and leaping, evidently in perfect health, and oh, so happy. No one in the house even thought of dinner that night, and poor black Cagey sobbed and moaned so loud and long Faye was obliged to ask him to be quiet. For hours I could not listen to the particulars. Faye says that they had not gone out so very far when he saw a wild cat some distance away, and taking careful aim, he shot it, but the cat, instead of falling, started on a fast run. Hal was in another direction, but when he heard the report of the rifle and saw the cat running, he started after it with terrific speed and struck it just as the cat fell, and then the two rolled over and over together. He got up and stood by Faye and Lieutenant Lomax while they examined the cat, and if there was anything wrong with him it was not noticed. But when they turned to come back to the post, dragging the dead cat after them, Faye heard a peculiar sound, and looking back saw dear Hal on the ground in a fit much like vertigo. He talked to him and petted him, thinking he would soon be over it, and the plucky dog did get up and try to follow, but went down again, and for the last time. The swift run and excitement caused by encountering an animal wholly different from anything he had ever seen before was too great a strain upon the weak heart. Before coming to the house, Faye had ordered a detail out to bury him, with instructions to cover the grave with pieces of glass to keep the wolves away. The skin and head of the cat, which was really a lynx, are being prepared for a rug, but I do not see how I can have the thing in the house, although the black spots and stripes with the white make the fur very beautiful. The ball passed straight through the body. The loneliness of the house is awful, and at night I imagine that I hear him outside whining to come in. Many a cold night have I been up 2 and 3 times to straighten his bed and cover him up. His bed was the skin of a young buffalo, and he knew just when it was smooth and nice, and then he would almost throw himself down with a sigh of perfect content. If I did not cover him at once, he would get up and drop down again, and there he would stay hours at a time, with the fur underneath and over him, with just his nose sticking out. He suffered keenly from the intense cold here because his hair was so short and fine. And then he was just from the South, too, where he was too warm most of the time. It makes me utterly wretched to think of the long year he was away from us at Baton Rouge. But what could we have done? We could not have him with us in the very heart of New Orleans, for he had already been stolen from us at Jackson Barracks, a military post. With him passed the very last of his blood, a breed of greyhounds that was known in Texas, Kansas, and Colorado as wonderful hunters, also remarkable for their pluck and beauty of form. Hal was a splendid hunter, and ever on the alert for game. Not one morsel of it would he eat, however, not even a piece of domestic fowl, which he seemed to look upon as game. Sheep he considered fine game, and would chase them every opportunity that presented itself. This was his one bad trait, an expensive one sometimes, but it was the only one, and was overbalanced many times by his lovable qualities that made him a favorite with all. Every soldier in the company loved him and was proud of him, and would have shared his dinner with the dog any day if called upon to do so. End of letter. End of section 9.